including cooperation with the country mandate. The experience of my office has repeatedly demonstrated that making human rights part of peace talks contributes to meaningful and sustainable peace in the long term. Our door remains open for greater engagement and cooperation. Israel continues to deny access to the occupied Palestinian territory by the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967. This has been the case for 3 successive holders of the mandate. Access has also been denied to all of the Council's previous commissions of inquiry, including on Gaza in 2014. I believe the Council's advocacy of impartial monitoring and expert recommendations is entirely justified by the gravity of the situation, and I urge Israel to provide access to all human rights mechanisms, including the investigative body mandated last month to enable impartial monitoring and advance accountability and justice. In China, despite efforts by my office to establish conditions conducive to an effective dialogue, my staff have not been given unfettered access to the country, including to the Tibetan Autonomous Region and the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, where the human rights situation is reportedly fast deteriorating. Moreover, although 2 mandate holders have visited the country in the past 5 years, China has, in that period, accumulated more than 15 pending requests for visits. I am therefore dismayed by China's continuing efforts to prevent independent members of civil society from engaging with human rights mechanisms, including treaty body reviews, this Council's UPR, and many mandate holders. I encourage the authorities to enable all actors to contribute to all the international human rights mechanisms and to cooperate with them in a spirit of open and mutual partnership in order to improve respect for the rights and freedoms of China's people. Regarding the situation in Turkey, an invitation for the High Commissioner to visit Ankara is not a substitute for access for the office to directly and objectively assess the situation in the southeast, where the authorities have consistently failed to conduct credible criminal investigations into the civilian deaths which occurred during security operations in 2015 and 2016. In the absence of adequate access, the office will continue remote monitoring of the situation. I note that Turkey received visits relating to torture, freedom of expression, and enforced disappearances in 2016, and encourage the government to allow further visits in the near future. Unconditional access to Bahrain continues to be refused to my office and to special procedures amid continued crackdowns on civil society and additional legislation which further restricts the people's fundamental rights. I encourage the Kingdom to reverse these profoundly damaging trends and to facilitate effective engagement with the international human rights mechanisms. And my office stands ready to provide technical and legal expertise. I deeply regret that there has been no progress regarding access for the office to all protracted conflicts in the South Caucasus to enable us to assess people's human rights needs and assist in addressing protection gaps. In addition, to date, access has not been granted by the authorities in control under the framework of this Council's resolutions 34/37 and 37/40 on cooperation with Georgia. In South Sudan, I acknowledge and welcome the government's cooperation with this Council's Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan. However, in violation of the Status of Forces Agreement, human rights officers working with UNMISS have been regularly denied access to locations where serious human rights violations and abuses are allegedly committed, impeding UNMISS's mandated task of monitoring the human rights situation. These include facilities run by the National Security Service, where hundreds of people are believed to be arbitrarily detained in conditions that could amount to torture. I am deeply concerned about the intensification of indiscriminate attacks against civilians, particularly a pattern of rapes and killings perpetrated by government forces and their proxies in unity states since April 2018. Human rights officers have documented the rape of children as young as 4 years old, and numerous cases of women, elderly people, and others being hanged or burned alive in what appears to be a deliberate scorched earth policy. I welcome Security Council Resolution 2414 on Western Sahara, which strongly encourages enhancing cooperation with OHCHR. I reiterate my readiness, or the readiness of my office, to undertake as soon as possible a follow-up technical mission to Western Sahara. I am concerned by the suspension of a visit to Rwanda by the Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture late last year, due to serious obstruction regarding access to some places of detention, the confidentiality of interviews, and concerns about potential reprisals. The SPT decided to resume the visit in 2018, but there has been no positive engagement with the authorities. I call on them to provide full cooperation so that the subcommittee can fulfill its important mandate. In Indonesia, I'm concerned that despite positive engagement by the authorities in many respects, the government's invitation to my office to visit Papua, which was made during my visit in February, has still not been honored. Bangladesh has granted extensive and commendable access to the office and all relevant human rights mechanisms with respect to the Rohingya refugee crisis. However, it has more than 10 outstanding requests for visits by mandate holders to assess the human rights situation in Bangladesh itself. I encourage greater engagement, particularly with respect to concerns about the shrinking space for civil society and allegations of extrajudicial actions by the security forces. In Mexico, despite a positive record of openness, which we deeply appreciate, I regret the lack of access for the Committee on Enforced Disappearances, despite repeated requests under Article 33 of the Convention. Since 2012, the committee has registered over 310 urgent actions on cases of enforced disappearances in the country, which represent more than 60% of all urgent actions registered to date. In Cameroon, I trust that recent promising discussions with the authorities will swiftly lead to approval for a mission by the office to all parts of the country. To date, this access has been refused despite the growing crisis in the Anglophone regions, with fighting between up to a dozen armed groups and the security forces. We have received reports of abuses and violations by all sides, including burning of schools and private property, mass arrests and arbitrary detentions, and the use of torture and excessive force by security personnel, leading to the displacement of 150,000 people within the country and over 20,000 to neighboring Nigeria. On Crimea, we have repeatedly asked the Russian Federation for access in line with the General Assembly's requests. Special procedures mandate holders have also sought to visit Crimea, most recently the Special Rapporteur on Torture. The Russian Federation's replies, while incompatible with GA Resolution 68/262, 71/205, and 72/190, nonetheless recognize that international human rights mechanisms must extend their reach to Crimea. I hope these encouraging responses can pave the way for additional steps to enable our access in the interests of the human rights protection of the people of the region. Mr. President, almost 40 states have received no visit by a special rapporteur over the past 5 years, despite requests. Among them, 15 states have more than 5 pending requests. Bahrain, Belarus, Bolivia, Colombia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Jamaica, Nicaragua, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, Uganda, Yemen, and Zimbabwe. I take this opportunity to emphasize that attempts by governments to selectively cherry-pick which mandates they will invite to their country undermine the integrity of the entire international human rights architecture, their own commitments to the equality and dignity of all their people, and the authority of this Council. There is also no exception to the requirement of cooperation for states in disagreement with the majority of Council members. Indeed, such an approach would eviscerate the meaning of the Council's decisions. I deplore the openly voiced refusal of a number of states to cooperate with this Council's independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity. Notably, the Russian Federation has formally refused to respond to any communications from the mandate holder, including joint submissions with other experts mandated by the Council, despite serious allegations of violence, discrimination, and exclusion of members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community, especially in Chechnya. In many states, LGBTI people face severe and often official discrimination, and almost everywhere they are inadequately protected from violence and bigotry. Protecting all human beings, including the LGBTI community, is not outside the international legal framework. Ending discrimination and violence for everyone, everywhere, is absolutely essential to our principles and work. Mr. President, at the same time, I am pleased to note a number of positive developments with respect to access for these special procedures. These include an increased response rate to communications, now at 68%, an increase of 13% over 2016. And Afghanistan's issuance of a standing invitation to all mandate holders, taking the number of states having done so to 118 UN member states and 1 non-member observer state. I note and commend the following states which have hosted at least 5 visits by thematic mandates in the last 5 years: Argentina, Australia, Azerbaijan, Brazil, Chile, Georgia, Ghana, Greece, Honduras, Italy, Kazakhstan, Mexico, the Republic of Korea, Serbia, Sri Lanka, Tunisia, Ukraine, the UK, and the US. Regarding engagement with the treaty bodies, I welcome the submission of long-standing reports to the committees by Bangladesh, Cape Verde, Central African Republic, Guinea, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Tonga, and Zambia. Allow me also to applaud Qatar's accession to the covenants and Afghanistan's accession to the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, and Degrading Treatment or Punishment. My office stands ready to support them in efforts to implement these commitments to ensure respect for their people's rights, and I urge other countries which have not ratified these and other human rights treaties to do so. Mr. President, in a number of areas, I am heartened by significant progress regarding access. During my second mission to Ethiopia in April, I was impressed and encouraged by the Prime Minister's commitment to undertake reforms that could well advance the rule of law and respect for fundamental human rights and principles, including a broad space for expression, peaceful assembly, and civil society participation. Following a long period of reluctance to engage with international human rights bodies, the recent conclusion of a much-awaited MOU will facilitate an extensive role for the office in the country, and I encourage the authorities to also accept visits by and guidance from special procedures experts in the context of the ongoing reforms. I applaud the lifting of the state of emergency